Name something more Canadian. I'll wait. Welcome to Quebec, home of poutine, Canadians who say excusez-moi instead of oh, excuse me, maple syrup, and you guessed it, William Shatner. In fact, Quebec produces over 70% of the world's real maple syrup, not that Aunt Jemima essential everyday Mrs. Butterworth imposter bullcrap. And this is a big industry. One barrel of maple syrup goes for over $1,300, 26 times more expensive than crude oil. However, Quebec's near monopoly on the syrup industry has come with a cost. You see, back in the good old days when everyone just ran around sucking syrup out of trees willy-nilly, the market was almost completely reliant on the mercy of the famously pleasant Canadian weather. If it was too cold or too hot, there wouldn't be enough syrup and prices would soar. But if the weather was just right, there would be too much syrup and prices would suck. What was your average Pierre to do? Syrup Cartel. Now, when I say cartel, I'm not talking about a bunch of buff Quebecois guys just waiting to smack your booty and then apologize to your girlfriend. I'm talking about the economic definition of a cartel, which is an association of manufacturers or suppliers with the purpose of maintaining prices at a high level and restricting competition. Not nearly as cool, but way more applicable. In order to control production, the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, as the cartel is known, imposed strict quotas on the production of maple syrup. Any syrup that is produced over the quota is confiscated by the Federation and added to the Global Strategic Reserve to be used in years with bad weather. Membership in the cartel is mandatory for all syrup producers in Quebec, and the Federation has been known to use some pretty extreme measures to enforce this. Okay, I just need to get these barrels hidden. You can do this. Alright, I just need you to sign here and here saying that you are going to register that syrup. No! Producers suspected of selling syrup on the black market are monitored 24/7 by bodyguards that they're forced to pay for. They also must turn over documents at a moment's notice and are subject to random inspections. While this only applies to rule breakers, it was enough to anger many producers who launched a rebellion against the Federation that included lawsuits, cutting down trees, and even setting fire to Federation sugar shacks, which is where maple syrup is made, not where the man in the white van said that he'd take you. However, the greatest act of defiance against the Federation was undoubtedly the Great Maple Syrup Heist of 2012. In the summer of 2012, a Federation employee began his ascent up a mountain of maple syrup barrels. During their yearly inspection of the Global Strategic Reserve, Federation officials count every barrel in the warehouse. Usually the barrels are heavy enough to climb on without any issue, but this year, some of them were suspiciously empty. Police were called to the scene to investigate, and they found many more empty barrels, and even more filled with water instead of syrup. All in all, 12.5% of the entire reserve was missing. 540,000 gallons of syrup worth over $13 million had simply vanished. This was a sticky situation. No, please, I'll never do it again! In the largest police investigation in the history of Quebec, over 250 investigators questioned 300 witnesses and searched 40 houses over the course of several months. Finally, in December of 2012, the ringleaders were found and arrested. So, how'd they do it? Who did it? Why'd they do it? Why won't my crush text me back? Introducing our lineup of syrup thieves! Canada does not have hockey right now, so this is the best they're gonna get for sports intros. Richard Valliere, disgruntled syrup producer sick and tired of the Federation's shenanigans. Avic Caron, formerly convicted of fraud and connected to the Italian mafia. On a side note, also owned the warehouse where the Federation kept its reserve. Etienne Saint-Pierre, hardcore free market capitalist with a violently French name and a thirst for black market maple syrup. And finally, Sébastien Coutreuse, truck driver. Starting almost a year before the missing barrels were discovered, Richard Valliere obtained access to the warehouse through his new business partner, Avic Caron. With the help of Sébastien Coutreuse, syrup barrels were taken from the warehouse and replaced with replica barrels that the crew had made themselves. The syrup was then transported to another warehouse where the official Federation barrels had their syrup siphoned out into unmarked containers. The original Federation barrels were then taken to a nearby creek and filled with water to make them heavy like the originals. These were then transported back to the Strategic Reserve to replace the temporary replicas. Finally, the stolen syrup was driven to New Brunswick and handed over to Etienne Saint-Pierre, who sold it to buyers in the United States, Japan, and Germany. This process was carried out for months without fail, but after a while the crew got lazy and just started emptying the barrels directly in the reserve. This led to the empty barrels that doomed their plot. And look, this scheme worked okay just a few years ago, but I feel like it would be even easier now. Oh my gosh.
Run, we're all gonna die!
Breaking news. All of the
toilet paper!
Alright, you want to load all this stuff up?
Sure.
Yeah, sure, that'd be a good idea. Let's do that. Luckily for the Thieves, the Global Strategic Reserve literally had no security, so it took the police a long time to find them, but when they did, they were swiftly brought to trial and sent to the worst place in the world for Canadians. The American South. Just kidding, our story ends in a Canadian prison, which is oddly anticlimactic. I mean, they filmed Beyond Scared Straight in America for a reason.